On the morning of Saturday, November 19, 1988, in Hayward, California, 9-year-old Michaela Garecht and her best friend Katrina Hogue, or simply Trina, who lived across the street from her, were getting ready to participate in a Christmas play at school and were rehearsing at Michaela's house. The girls were running back and forth between their houses, finding different clothing items in closets to help them better fit their roles. When Michaela entered the house with Trina for the last time, she asked her mother if they could go to the nearby Rainbow Market to buy some candy and soda. Michaela's mother, Sharon Murch, was initially against the idea. Although the store was only 2 blocks away, Sharon said Michaela had only been there a few times before and always accompanied by older neighborhood kids. So Sharon said no, but Michaela kept pleading and begging, and finally her mother gave in. Around 10 a.m., Sharon watched as Michaela and Trina took 2 scooters, belonging to Trina and her brother, and rode off to the store. Michaela had her own scooter, but the girls liked pretending to be twins, so they chose to use 2 identical scooters of the same model. Before leaving, Michaela turned back and said to her mother, "Bye, Mom, I love you." Sharon had no idea that these 5 words would be the last she would ever hear from her daughter. Michaela and Katrina bought some candy and drinks and left the store. They started walking home, forgetting that they had left their scooters outside the store. Remembering them, the girls returned, but found that one of the scooters was no longer where they had left it. Michaela was the first to notice that the scooter had been moved about 3 parking spaces away from the entrance, next to a parked car. Around 10:15 a.m., as Michaela approached the scooter and bent down to grab the handlebars and pick it up, a man suddenly jumped out of the car, grabbed her, and forced her into the vehicle while she screamed in terror. The kidnapper immediately sped away down the highway toward Hayward. Katrina, the only witness to the abduction, quickly ran back into the store and reported what had happened. Police arrived almost immediately, and soon after them came Michaela's father, Rod Garecht, and Trina's father. Unfortunately, the store employee who had called the police to report the incident gave an inaccurate description of the kidnapper, mistakenly thinking it was a man she had seen earlier. During the first 48 hours of the search, the most crucial period in a kidnapping case, police and the public were looking for a mustached man, over 30 years old, driving a burgundy car, when in reality the suspect looked very different. Once the police realized the mistake and spoke with Katrina, they corrected the description. According to Katrina, the man was actually a young adult, between 18 and 24 years old, approximately 5 and 10 inches tall, about 180 centimeters, and weighing around 175 pounds, about 80 kilograms. She described him as having slanted, fox-like eyes, shoulder-length dark blonde hair, and either pockmarks or acne on his face. The kidnapper's vehicle was described as a large, old American-made sedan, gold or possibly bronze in color, in poor condition. The young witness also thought there might have been splattered cement along the sides of the car, and that the rear bumper had additional lights. In the same year following the girl's disappearance, the police received 5,000 tips, and they continue to receive them regularly to this day. Since Michaela's abduction, investigators have followed every possible lead, trying to locate vehicles matching the witness's description, searching places where she might have been hidden, questioning registered sex offenders, and speaking with neighbors, relatives, and store employees. Michaela's mother praised the efforts of law enforcement, noting a tremendous number of people worked on Michaela's case during those early days, both police officers and FBI agents. They went through everything. The investigators were true professionals. In other words, according to Michaela's mother, if they were unable to immediately track down the kidnapper, it certainly wasn't due to a lack of effort from law enforcement. However, despite the tireless efforts of the police and the FBI, no lead has ever resulted in finding out Michaela's exact whereabouts. As for physical evidence, several palm prints were found on the scooter. Since the scooter belonged to Katrina's brother, it had been frequently handled by the girl's friends and family members. It is now impossible to determine whether the kidnapper ever touched the scooter, and if so, where exactly. Even if he had grabbed it and was not wearing gloves, isolating a clean DNA sample would have been impossible. After the scooter was examined for fingerprints, it was returned to Katrina's family shortly after Michaela's abduction. Interestingly, Michaela's abduction was not the first in the San Francisco Bay Area. Within just 8 months, 3 young girls were abducted: Amber Swartz-Garcia, Michaela Garecht, and Ilene Misheloff. 7-year-old Amber was the first of the 3 kidnapped girls. She was last seen on June 3, 1988. Michaela was abducted on November 19, 1988. 13-year-old Ilene Misheloff disappeared on January 30, 1989, while walking home from school. There were several suspects whose names were linked to both Michaela's case and the cases of the two other missing girls, but either there were reasons to believe they were not involved or there was no way to prove their involvement. One of the suspects in Michaela's case was James DiVeggio. He committed crimes with the direct involvement of his wife. Together with Michelle Michaud, he abducted, assaulted, and murdered Vanessa Swanson in 1997. The couple was charged with the crimes in 2002 and sentenced to the maximum penalty. Since James operated in the San Francisco Bay Area, it is quite possible that he abducted other girls who are still missing, although he has never been charged in connection with those cases. In particular, he remains the prime suspect in the case of Ilene Misheloff. On January 30, 1989, 13-year-old Ilene was walking home from school in Dublin, California. She was last seen at 3 p.m. as she walked along the town's main road. Later, she had planned to go ice skating at a local rink, but she never arrived. Her backpack was later found near a nearby creek. Police believe she was abducted and may no longer be alive. Her case has been linked to the abductions of Michaela Garecht and Amber Swartz-Garcia, with suspects including Tim Bindner, Philip and Nancy Garrido, Curtis Dean Anderson, and James DiVeggio. James DiVeggio is considered the prime suspect in Ilene's case because some of his other victims were approximately her age. He abducted young girls in broad daylight and tended to target them during the fall and winter months. Ilene was abducted in winter. Additionally, other girls he attacked were abducted near her home. In January 1989, DiVeggio was living in Pleasanton, about 5 miles from Dublin, and at the time he had a girlfriend living in Dublin. Thus, Ilene's abduction fit his pattern perfectly. But authorities were unable to formally charge him. According to Sharon, this was probably the lead that investigators pursued the most. In 1991, an 11-year-old girl named J.C. Lee Dugard was abducted by an unknown couple right near her home while she was waiting for her school bus. Much like Michaela's case, James DiVeggio and Michelle Michaud were considered suspects in J.C.'s disappearance, but it was later determined that they had no involvement. On August 26, 2009, J.C. was found alive and well. It turned out that she had been held captive by convicted sex offender Philip Garrido and his wife Nancy Garrido. She was kept in captivity for 18 years and gave birth to 2 daughters during that time. Philip Garrido's appearance shared many similarities with the composite sketch of Michaela's abductor, and he owned a car similar to the one used during Michaela's kidnapping. In fact, it was because of the car that Michaela's investigators first turned their attention to Garrido. When the Garrido's house appeared in the news in 2009, Katrina Hoag noticed a car in the footage that looked similar to the one involved in Michaela's abduction. She called Michaela's mother and asked if she thought Garrido might have been involved. In 1988, Garrido lived in public housing located about 30 kilometers from Michaela's home. The suspect description given by Trina closely resembled a photo of Philip Garrido taken in the late 1980s. Interestingly, Michaela and JC look remarkably alike, almost like sisters, when their photos are placed side by side. Investigators spoke with JC regarding both Ilene Misheloff and Michaela Garecht, especially since Garrido had been released from prison right around the time the girls were abducted. JC, however, stated that she knew nothing about the other girls. Investigators questioned Garrido, his wife, Nancy, and other accomplices. They ultimately concluded that neither Philip nor Nancy was involved in Michaela's abduction. Although polygraph tests are not admissible in court due to their inaccuracy, it's worth noting that both Philip and Nancy passed theirs. After JC's rescue, police thoroughly searched the Garrido's house and surrounding property. They examined all outbuildings and land, but found no trace of Michaela, Ilene, or any evidence that either girl had ever been there. Police even searched the backyard to see if the perpetrator might have buried one of the girls. Bones were found, but they turned out to be from an ancient burial site, likely a Native American cemetery. Philip Garrido was sentenced to 431 years in prison. His wife Nancy was sentenced to 36 years to life. Garrido still remains a possible suspect in the kidnappings of Michaela and Ilene. For many years, Timothy Bindner was suspected in the abduction of Michaela Garecht, as well as in the disappearances of Amber Swartz-Garcia, Ilene Misheloff, and several other girls who went missing from the San Francisco Bay Area around the same time. Bindner had some rather questionable habits. For example, he liked sending letters and money to young girls, and according to Michaela's mother, he inserted himself into the investigation by offering to help. However, he was never arrested or charged with any crime. A married man, Bindner first attracted police attention after he started sending greeting cards with poems and cash gifts to young girls in the Bay Area. He was fired from his job at the Social Security Administration after it was discovered that he had been using his access to private information to contact the girls. When confronted about his actions, Bindner claimed that his intentions were innocent, saying he only sent small gifts and that he simply wanted to cheer up lonely girls. Authorities did not accept his explanation, and suspicions about his involvement in the abductions grew. Bindner also became a suspect because of his unusual obsession with missing children's cases. He sent numerous letters to police and the FBI. Shortly before Michaela's abduction, he told the FBI that he wished the next kidnapped child would be 9 years old. And Michaela, indeed, was 9 when she was abducted. In 1990, Bindner sent a holiday card to an FBI profiler featuring a child holding up 4 fingers. In December 1991, 4-year-old Amanda Campbell was abducted. Bindner approached many of the mothers of missing girls in the area, offering his assistance, including the families of Amber and Michaela. He introduced himself to Kim Swartz, Amber's mother, just days after her daughter disappeared. Bindner resembled a man witnesses had seen forcing a little girl into a bronze-colored car on the day Amber went missing. Investigators asked Kim to befriend Bindner in hopes of learning whether he knew anything about the missing girls. After spending time with him, Kim said Bindner was obsessed with mind games and manipulation, but he revealed no useful information about the cases. On the day Michaela was abducted, Bindner also went to her house to share his thoughts and offer help with the search. Since several people had shown up that day to offer support, his behavior did not seem particularly strange to Sharon at the time. Despite his unusual fixation, there was no evidence linking Bindner to any of the missing girls. He also did not match the composite sketch created from Katrina's description. Moreover, police may have been hesitant to pursue Bindner aggressively out of fear that he might sue them. In fact, Bindner had previously sued the city of Fairfield, the hometown of Amanda Campbell, for defamation and won $90,000 in damages. About a quarter of a century after Michaela Garecht's abduction, a new lead offered by a convicted killer could have helped police solve the case. But for her family, who still hoped Michaela would one day come home, it would mean that such a reunion would never happen. Wesley Sherman-Tyne, one half of the infamous criminal duo known as the Speed Freak Killers, sent a letter to the Stockton Record newspaper claiming that his partner, Lauren Herzog, was responsible for Michaela's abduction. The Speed Freak Killers committed their crimes between 1984 and 1999 and were initially convicted of 4 murders in San Joaquin County, California, though investigators suspected they could be responsible for as many as 72 deaths. In his letter to the newspaper, Sherman-Tyne wrote that Herzog's family lived in Castro Valley, California, and that Herzog resembled the composite sketch of Michaela's abductor. Sherman-Tyne also promised to lead police to remote areas in San Joaquin and Calaveras counties where the 2 men had buried several bodies. Investigators followed up on this lead and found that Sherman-Tyne wanted to exchange information about the victims' burial sites in return for prison concessions. When police searched the areas he indicated, they discovered about 500 bone fragments. One bone fragment was analyzed and initially thought to possibly belong to a child between the ages of 5 and 10. However, after comparing the DNA with Michaela's, it was determined that the remains belonged to another victim. It's important to note that investigators working on Michaela's case heavily criticized San Joaquin County investigators for obstructing the investigation and mishandling the potential link between the serial killers and Michaela's disappearance. The San Joaquin investigators had conducted the search in a sloppy manner, using standard excavators without bringing in forensic specialists to oversee the dig. As a result, remains from different individuals became mixed together, and after the area was reburied, it became impossible to properly investigate whether more bodies were still there. Additionally, the San Joaquin investigators refused to cooperate with the Michaela case team, and at one point the sheriff's office was accused of deleting important documents, including key files on the Speed Freak Killers that were needed for the investigation. In 2012, a Hayward detective reported that a San Joaquin deputy sheriff told him that, during the excavation, they had found shoes resembling those Michaela wore on the day she disappeared in 1988. However, the detective was not allowed to see the shoes or even a photograph of them. Eventually, the Hayward detective grew frustrated with the uncooperative San Joaquin authorities And Michaela's mother wrote on her blog that Hayward police never got to see the piece of evidence, the Mary Jane-style shoes. Although it cannot be ruled out that Herzog was responsible for Michaela's abduction, no physical evidence has been found to confirm this. Lauren Herzog died in prison in 2012. In general, the speed freak killer's victims tended to be teenagers or young women who voluntarily went somewhere with the two men. Nonetheless, they are still considered possible suspects in Michaela's case. By the time of his death in prison in 2007, Curtis Dean Anderson was already a hardened criminal. Later, the former taxi driver would also be labeled a serial killer. Anderson had been convicted of the murder of 7-year-old Gianna Fairchild from Vallejo in 1999, as well as the kidnapping of an 8-year-old girl from the same city the following year. Fortunately, the 8-year-old managed to escape from Anderson's car and seek help from a truck driver who took note of Anderson's license plate number. This led to Anderson's arrest. 1 month before his death from liver and kidney failure, Anderson made a confession. He admitted that he had kidnapped 7-year-old Amber Swartz-Garcia while she was playing with a jump rope outside her home in Pinole in 1988. He said he had taken her to Arizona and killed her. Police and the FBI spent 18 months investigating his confession and could not find any evidence disproving his claims. Anderson stated that Amber was his first victim. He also confessed to other sexual crimes in the San Francisco Bay Area, but only signed a confession regarding Amber's murder. However, many, including Amber's mother Kim, were skeptical of Anderson's statements. The criminal relished the notoriety he gained and enjoyed taunting and manipulating the police and the families of his victims. Some believe his confession about Amber was just another example of this behavior. Amber disappeared on June 3, 1988, in the middle of the day. She was playing with a jump rope outside the house where she lived with her mother, Kim Schwartz. Anderson didn't live in the city, but he was familiar with the streets because he had worked as a taxi driver and also delivered lost airline baggage. The sheriff explained, "The perpetrator claimed he was driving to Arizona and decided to pick up a companion along the way. By a tragic coincidence, Amber was standing in front of her house just as Anderson happened to drive by. He opened his car door and pulled her inside. Then he gave the girl alcohol because he thought it was better than using duct tape." Anderson said he killed Amber in a motel near Tucson, though police have not disclosed the details of how he did it. He disposed of her body in the desert near his aunt's ranch in Benson. Her remains were never found, possibly because wild animals discovered them first, or perhaps because Anderson lied. Anderson confessed in writing to killing Amber. But without a body or other physical evidence, it has been difficult for her mother to fully believe he was responsible for her disappearance. Ultimately, Amber's family succeeded in reopening the case in 2013 because they remained uncertain about the truth of Anderson's claims. Anderson was never charged in the kidnappings of Ilene or Michaela, and investigators remain unsure whether he was involved in those cases. Before his death, he did confess to being involved in several other open cases, though police have not released specific details. The killer himself claimed that many girls had become his victims and that they would never be found. Grinning, he said, "Maybe I did all these things, or maybe I didn't." It should be noted that there is not much information about the last suspect, but Michaela's mother believes this version is quite plausible and could clarify many unclear aspects of her kidnapping. In the 1980s, there was a man involved in the illegal distribution of child pornography in the US and Mexico. His name was Richard Hellwig. In March 1989, he was detained at the border when returning from a trip to Mexico. In his car, authorities found forbidden photographs and clippings from articles about Michaela and Amber Swartz-Garcia. Hellwig had a girlfriend in Mexico who was raising 2 daughters. Police questioned the girlfriend, and she was found to have earrings similar to those Michaela wore. The woman initially said that Hellwig had given them to her, but later changed her statement, claiming she had bought them at a flea market. This isn't too unlikely since, according to Michaela's mother, such earrings were quite popular back then. However, the girlfriend also mentioned that her boyfriend had given her a t-shirt similar to the one Michaela was wearing when she disappeared, although this t-shirt was not found during the search. What's most interesting is that police spoke to the girlfriend's 2 daughters, each of whom was interviewed separately. Both girls said that both Michaela and Amber had been at their house. As we already know, Curtis Dean Anderson confessed to Amber's kidnapping, but there was no supporting evidence for his words, and it's possible that he had ulterior motives for confessing to the crime. Hellwig went to prison, where he eventually died. Even on his deathbed, he was asked about Michaela's case. Investigators tried to get a confession or any information from him, but Hellwig refused to speak and neither admitted nor denied his involvement in Michaela's kidnapping. This is just one example of clues that didn't become public knowledge. Many people believe in the guilt of Garrido or Herzog, but only because they have never heard of Hellwig or other potential suspects. This is, in many ways, a very reliable lead. It holds great significance because, if true, it would mean Michaela was kidnapped not by one criminal for personal gain, but by an organized group of criminals. This would explain why the abduction was so smooth. Based on the execution, it's clear that the perpetrator had done this before and had prepared for a quick abduction in broad daylight. Although this story starts in Mexico, it may very well not end there. If Michaela was initially transported to Mexico, she could now be anywhere in the world. For example, in the United Arab Emirates. Why? Because Michaela's mother received several messages claiming her daughter had been seen in the UAE. After 30 years, the cases of Michaela, Amber, and Ilene remain unsolved. These have been incredibly difficult years for their families, but they have not given up and have continued searching. Sharon, in particular, continues to maintain a blog dedicated to her daughter titled Dear Michaela. She regularly writes letters to Michaela, hoping that somehow she will be able to see them. Sharon shares valuable information about her daughter's case and dispels many myths that have developed over the years. Her blog has long become something more than just a mother's cry for help. On its pages, one can find information on how to escape from any corner of the world, no matter where the criminals may be holding the girl. So even if Sharon can no longer help Michaela, at least she can help other girls who find themselves in difficult situations. For many years, I lived without answers, but I didn't lose hope, though it was incredibly difficult, says the mother. And still, I don't want to lose hope.